The war that makes no sense. How Washington and Tel Aviv manufactured a crisis with Iran. There is something disturbingly surreal about the moment we are living through. As Israeli and American bombs continue to fall on Iran, the justification for this war grows thinner by the day. What began as a supposedly urgent defensive operation is rapidly dissolving into a theater of contradictions, improvisations, and political theater. The official narrative changes by the hour, the logic collapses under scrutiny, and the statements coming out of Washington increasingly resemble the ramblings of men trying to explain a decision that was never meant to be explained. At the center of this unfolding spectacle stands US President Donald Trump, who now appears regularly before the press attempting to rationalize a conflict whose legal and moral foundation is almost non-existent. The war has been presented as a preemptive strike to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons and launching attacks on Israel, the United States, or its allies. Yet, even within Washington's own messaging, there is a glaring contradiction. Only months earlier, American officials had declared that Iran's nuclear infrastructure had been effectively destroyed. If that claim were true, then the central justification for war collapses instantly. The deeper one examines the arguments coming out of Washington, the more confused they appear. Senior officials briefing lawmakers in Washington admitted that Israel had already decided to strike Iran, regardless of whether the United States joined the operation. In other words, the war was not triggered by an imminent Iranian attack, but by Israel's strategic timetable. The implication is impossible to ignore. Instead of the United States independently assessing a threat to its own national security, it appears to have been drawn into a conflict whose origins lie primarily in Israeli strategic calculations. Even inside the US Congress, the explanation has raised alarm. Lawmakers have openly questioned whether American soldiers should risk their lives for a conflict driven by the priorities of an ally rather than by a direct threat to the United States itself. If the danger to American interests was truly imminent, they argue, the evidence should be overwhelming and undeniable. Yet such proof has not been presented. The logic of the war grows even shakier when examined through the statements of Trump's own allies. Prominent conservative voices in the United States have openly challenged the administration's narrative. Several commentators from within the president's political base have bluntly argued that the conflict is fundamentally Israel's war, not America's. Their argument is simple. The United States has no direct territorial dispute with Iran, no history of Iranian invasions of American soil, and no clear evidence that Tehran was preparing an immediate attack on American forces. In their view, Washington has allowed itself to be pulled into a geopolitical confrontation whose true objective is regional dominance in the Middle East. This internal dissent exposes a remarkable fracture within the American political landscape. For decades, Washington's Middle East policy has been shaped by a powerful convergence of political interests, lobbying networks, and strategic alliances that ensure Israeli priorities carry enormous weight in American decision-making. The result is a foreign policy framework in which Israeli security concerns frequently become indistinguishable from American strategic interests. But the contradictions are now becoming too obvious to ignore. One moment, the war is described as a defensive action to stop an Iranian attack. The next moment, officials acknowledge that Israel had already planned the strike regardless of American participation. Then, another explanation emerges. Iran supposedly posed a long-term strategic threat that had to be eliminated before it could materialize. These shifting narratives reveal a deeper truth. The war was not triggered by a single urgent event. It emerged from a long-standing geopolitical struggle over influence in the Middle East, control of strategic resources, and the balance of power in a region that remains central to global energy markets. Iran, with its large population, vast oil and gas reserves, and independent foreign policy, has long been viewed in Washington and Tel Aviv as an obstacle to regional dominance. For decades, economic sanctions, covert operations, cyber attacks, and diplomatic isolation have been deployed in an attempt to weaken the Iranian state. Military confrontation was always the final option, waiting in the wings. What we are witnessing now is the moment when that option has been activated. Yet, the most troubling aspect of this conflict is the casual dismissal of international law that accompanies it. The principle governing modern international order is supposed to be simple. Wars of aggression are illegal unless a nation faces an immediate threat. Pre-emptive attacks without clear evidence of such a threat violate the very framework that was established after the Second World War to prevent global conflict. But in this case, that framework has been brushed aside with astonishing ease. Officials openly declared that traditional rules of engagement no longer apply. Legal restraints are treated as inconveniences rather than obligations. The message is unmistakable. Power, not law, determines legitimacy. This is the dangerous logic of the jungle. It is the belief that might alone defines right, that stronger nations may strike weaker ones whenever they deem it necessary, and that international norms exist only for those without the military power to ignore them. History has shown where such thinking leads. Wars launched on vague threats and ideological fears rarely end where their architects expect. The Middle East itself bears the scars of similar experiments: Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, each justified by confident predictions and moral certainty, each leaving behind instability that still reverberates across the world. The attack on Iran now risks repeating that same tragic pattern on an even larger scale. And as the bombs continue to fall, the central question grows louder with each passing day. If the justification for this war keeps changing, was there ever a legitimate reason for it at all? Sometimes, the most dangerous wars are not those driven by clear strategic necessity, but those born from ambition, fear, and the illusion that power alone can rewrite the rules of the world. History rarely looks kindly on such illusions, and the world is watching. Please visit my website at www.oblongmedia.net for more in-depth analysis on a broad array of issues and a treasure trove of articles. Thank you.